everyone. Today we are honored to welcome Dr. Janaki Akella. Dr. Akella is a seasoned executive with unique experience blending technology background with global strategy consulting as McKinsey and co-partner, operations leadership and digital transformation as a Google executive and executive management as a public board director. She enjoys corporate governance as the sitting board director at Southern Company, a $100 billion market cap public gas and electric utility, Fractal AI, a company Portugal Public, Akamai, and Sally Mae. Please join me in giving a warm welcome to Dr. Janaki Akella.
Yes. Good morning, everyone. Good morning. Come on, I'm your second speaker, not even your first. So a little bit about myself. I'll give by way of context, and I don't want to use slides. Tell me if you can't hear me. I have a fairly loud voice, and then we can go through. So a little bit about me. I did my undergraduate in India, came over here, did a PhD in Carnegie Mellon in electrical and computer science, very much the sort of STEM orientation, if you will. Joined Hewlett-Packard and worked on the Itanium computer chip, which was very much about the 64-bit chip at that time. Obtained some patents, most of them around the small memory block algorithms of the supply chain, and how do you think about processing certain types of algorithms. And then made a pivot. So this is where I want you guys to think about a little bit that, yes, I started with a very traditional STEM education, and then made a pivot, because the education is not about the particular profession, but it's about critical analysis. It's thinking. It lays a very strong foundation for you to go and do a bunch of stuff. So if you're here wondering, what am I going to do? And am I now committed? And if I have not taken a particular course, what am I going to do? The world is wide open. You don't have to think about that at this stage, and think about what is it that interests you. So after a few years and after pursuing patents, etc., at Hewlett-Packard Labs as a technical scientist, I switched into McKinsey and Company. I went there in order to do consulting. So now the question is, as a scientist, I had a couple of routes. One of them was to continue, become a scientist, a fellow, perhaps go towards a Nobel Prize. And then you ask yourself this question, am I really going to do that? What is my passion? What is the extent of my passion? Is it going to take me all the way there? Or do I want to be kind of a scientist in between? And I did not want to be a kind of a scientist or a researcher, and said, let me see what is the impact of my work on a broader ecosystem. Let me go try to understand, what does this research do? Where does this chip get put in? What are the kinds of things? What is the notion of a business? And that's what took me into McKinsey. I remember the interview I had at McKinsey, they would ask me questions like, that time Nokia was big, and they would ask me questions like, what is the CAGR and how do you think about it? And I have a PhD in computer science, I had no idea what the word CAGR even meant. So we'd look at them in order to come back and say, what do I do? But at the end of the day, it's compound interest, and so when they explain compound interest, you can figure it out. So I told myself I would spend a couple of years at McKinsey and try to figure out what is the impact of the work, how is the business formed, how does the business grow? And very much a lot of that is innovation and ideas, but that's a small part of the story. What is the bigger part of the story, and how does the business grow? And then had the privilege to serve many, many companies, many of the companies that you would recognize, for about 18 years. I was the first woman partner to be elected globally as in their digital practice, and then went on to have a child. I'm an older mom, and then I thought, there's a lot of outsourcing practices. My mother told me, you're outsourcing many things, but you're also outsourcing parenting, and didn't want to do that, and so I decided to come back and spend some time with my child. That's when Google called me and said, well, you don't have to travel, you don't have to call United Airlines your phone, why don't you come and spend some time with us? And I spent time with three of their biggest product areas. One is search, second is cloud, and then the third is advertising. And then after that came back and said, okay, now what is the next phase of my career? So as you're thinking about this, chart my career through, started as a STEM PhD, did the patent stuff, went into strategic consulting, did the partner stuff, and now I'm thinking about what is the impact and how can I think about this. went on, and now I'm a sitting board director. So I do corporate governance. Corporate governance in the sense of I am on the board, as the introduction mentioned, of Southern. The previous speaker spoke to you about utility. It's a utility company, $100 billion utility company. And now we take some serious questions. What is the geopolitical risk? How is the company going to function? What should the CEO do? What is an M&A situation? What is his compensation? How do we go and set? There's so much questions about, is the CEO compensated, fairly compensated with respect to the employee, and what is the difference there? Some questions. How should they think about nuclear? How should they think about small modular reactors that are coming out? Today, it takes about 12 years in order to build a nuclear reactor. A nuclear reactor, which means you're going through multiple administrations, Democratic, Republic, and each one of their beliefs with respect to how the nuclear industry should function in the United States has changed over the years. Nuclear engineering now taught us probably in one or two very small schools. And so one fine day you wake up and say, I want nuclear engineering and I want a nuclear reactor. It's going to take you another 15 years to get there. What is the way to get there? So these are some questions that the CEO and company is talking about. Carbon sequestration, we spoke about carbon. Some of you are interested in climate change. What is the real problem here? The carbon sequestration, capturing carbon from air is very, very difficult. So hence you come back and say, can we come back and change and get out of fossil fuels? Today in the United States, 40% of the energy comes from LNG, liquefied gas, natural gas. So how do we think about gas as a source of electricity? I'll go through a little bit more about the electricity story in California if you're interested in. And then how do you think about wind and solar and all of these things? We have geopolitical risk. We have a huge number of solar panels from China. What does a company do when the administration come in and decides that our relationship with this particular country is not great? Where are you going to get your solar panels from? How do you think about eminent domain? You think about the transmission lines which are going multiple miles in order to go and take the electricity. Electricity has three parts: make, move, and sell. You have to generate it, you have to transmit it, and then you do retail distribution. When you transmit it, it is going through huge, vast expanses of area where definitely there are environmental concerns. So now if you talk about a question, a trade-off of do I supply electricity to an AI data center, which you might think is a must-have and not a nice-to-have, but I have a hospital in that region, which is a must-have as an electricity company. How do I supply electricity to them when I'm battling with trying to lay my transmission line over these domains? How do I think about it? Let's come back to electricity, right? Let's come back to core electrical engineering. There's a loss of electricity as it goes through these lines. You have the capacitors at each end, which are charging and discharging. When they're charging and discharging, you have a loss. And that loss can range from 5% to 25%. So if there's a way of addressing that loss, maybe that's a way of making up the energy gap that we have today. These are all some of the questions that you think about it. So now you take a step back and say, yes, I started with basic electrical engineering, but as a board member, what am I doing and how am I helping a company which is battling energy transition and wants to have it responsible and affordable? Remember, one of the charters of an electrical company is to make it affordable. And how do you go ahead and do that? Let me talk about the second company that I'm on the board of, Sallie Mae. Sallie Mae is an educational institution company. Educational in that they provide private loans. Many of you graduating will probably take private loans, student loans, in order to go through your education system. A bunch of them, the colleges, which have endowments, provide you scholarships, no doubt, that's wonderful. And then you have the remaining part of it as the cost of higher education goes up. Now you have this question of, and higher education includes undergraduate education. So how are you going to pay for this? The government of the United States has had many reforms, and this started at the time the GI were coming back from World War II, where they came back and said, let's go ahead and try to help them in order to establish their life when they come back, and so they set up educational loans. Now these educational loans require little by way of creditworthiness, whether you or your co-signer is able to do it, are able to repay, but then you go ahead and take the loans. Now the question becomes, is it responsible? Are you ever going to be able to take a career where the loan plus the interest is something within your reach to pay back or not. So that's what this Salome does, where we come back and look at the credit worthiness, and then you come back. And recently the PLUS reform, higher education, was enacted by the Trump administration. And in this administration, they took a very strong point of view in which they came back and said, higher education loans are not the business of the administration, and the schools have to deal with it, or small business loans. So now you look at some of these things which are tenets, fundamental tenets of the society, and you look at how they have changed through multiple administrations. It's not a matter of whether it's right or wrong, but as you think about this sustaining power of these and how it affects a number of these things. So now you're a company in this and you're trying to figure out how do you go ahead and give loans in a manner that is sustainable and meets the education goals of the children. So that's the second company that I'm on the board of. Again, you might come back and say, it's a far fetch from where I started in STEM. Yes, indeed it is. But the aspects of critical thinking, how do you think and how do you guide the company, how do you guide the CEO, how do you guide the C-suite in terms of what they need to do, is essentially the same. So as long as you have a passion and an interest in order to go and say, I want to do this. And I got interested in education because as a McKinsey partner, I took on a pro bono study with the Department of Education in California, where I looked at the K through 12 public school system education, and fortunately leaves a lot to be desired. So when I looked at that and said, is there something that I would like to do and to contribute and give back, and that's what took me to Salome. Let me talk third one about the company, which is Akamai Technologies. I just joined their board. Very much a iconic company when it started maybe 20 years ago. One of the founders was from Carnegie Mellon, my alma mater. And there, the idea is the following. If you have these networks and you're trying to send content across these networks, it's going to be a long time before it reaches. So if you think of video streaming today, or you think of any of these NBA or sports, it is going to be a significantly long time as it traverses these networks before it can reach the end user. So you have questions of course, equity, quality of service, in terms of does a particular content on the network get higher priority than the other content or not, be that as it may. How does it reach, and how can you make sure that the latency and bandwidth requirements of these networks that are provided by telecoms are going to reach in a manner that's going to reach the end user. So Akamai came out with the technology of caching the content at the end of the service. So you have your web servers, app servers, and then they cache the content at the very end in order to provide a very low latency. So one of the applications that I worked on was, Amazon Prime or Victoria brands, Future brands, all of these. There's 1 week in the year when they have their sales promotions. And at this time, they would like the rendering to be very high quality and then reach the end customers within nanoseconds. Milliseconds are not good enough. So now you come back and say, how can you do this? So this is the basic content delivery caching technology that is provided by Akamai. As it is doing this, one of the questions, think about it. Instead of having a centralized server, you have the servers which are spread across thousands, hundreds of thousands. Now this gives vulnerability, security vulnerabilities. You have nation-state actors, you have cyber risk all over the place. So then you come back and think about how you think about cyber breaches and how can you go ahead and protect the network and the end users against this. It's very interesting what we are going through in terms of the geopolitical risks, whether it's the Russia-Ukraine war, whether it is potentially a war in Taiwan, the war in Estonia, the Israel-Hamas, etc. All of these things gives rise to rising cyber security breaches. Now, the fact that it has not happened does not mean that the nation-state actor or the bad threat actors have not entered your network system. All it means is that they've chosen not to attack yet. They're called sleepers. They gain into your network and then they wait for an opportune moment in order to come back and then attack. So the question is, if you're a company and you're trying to defend, how do you do this? What kind of cybersecurity technologies and innovations should you do in order to go ahead and protect yourself? So that's the third thing. This is very much the, my wheelhouse in terms of, the STEM education that I started with. But again, you can see some of the questions, very significant questions, which is very broad, much broader in terms of rather than the specific foundational education that I have. And then the last one is I'm currently on the board of the AI company, pure play services company called Fractal. And we've just filed the red herring prospects and we will go IPO very soon. It's a very interesting question in terms of, yes, you have the LLMs, you have the very large language models, and these large language models are being done by the 3 or 4 big companies. What is the rest of the enterprises? What do they do in terms of generating value from AI? They are not the ones who are going to be developing these models. What do? They take those models, then apply it to your own data, and then solve the particular enterprise problem that you have. So for instance, if you're an energy company and you're trying to buy energy in the spot market, by the way, when you buy it in the spot market, the energy auction cost is probably 10x what you would do if you were making it. So even if you can save off a few percentage points, is very significant. So this is if you take this as the problem, now you cannot go and ask ChatGPT to solve it because it has neither the data, nor the training, nor the inferencing in order to go and solve this. What you would do is to take that large language model within your enterprise and then train it on your data and do the inferencing on your data, so then your auctioneer, the energy auctioneer, can then apply this in order to go and buy energy in a better way. So that's an example. So the biggest next wave that we see of AI coming is solving AI within the enterprise itself, and Fractal is very heavily engaged there. Let me pause there in order to see if there are any questions in terms of how your basic STEM education can then take you to areas that you might never expect as you go on in your careers. Yeah? I'm happy to dive into any of these. Yes? Sure.
You've talked about STEM education, and you've also talked a lot about critical thinking and how they should usually overlap. But especially now with the widespread use of AI and ChatGPT, do you think those types of tools are decreasing critical thinking in the education system?
Your question is, so do I think?
Do you think that the widespread use of tools like ChatGPT in the STEM education system is decreasing critical thinking?
Oh no. So let me give you an example, right? Let me give you an example. So the question is, does the use of AI tools decrease your critical thinking? I don't think so. On the contrary, I think that the use of AI requires you to have more critical thinking. I'll give you an example, right? So we are trying to do an analysis, let's take of the network security segment, because this happens to be on my head now. So now we go ahead and divide it, and then in the olden days, I would have to go and pull reports from multiple places, whether it's an IEEE report, whether it's a MIT report, whether it's a Gartner report, multiple reports, and assemble that picture in order to come back and say, what are the different segments? What are the markets? What is the API market? What is the zero network market? What is the data loss prevention market? So I'd have to assemble it myself and then construct that picture to answer the question of, what is the size of each segment? Today I can go into ChatGPT and say, give me the network market and what is the segment? Great. What do I do with it next? Right? So this is where the critical thinking comes in, where you have to have known what is it that you are going to do with that data, and ChatGPT is not going to tell you that. So the critical thinking comes in that you need to know what is the hypothesis that you're testing. Am I going to test that the DLP is the bigger market? Am I going to test that maybe a smaller market is growing at a larger rate, or something else? So very much in terms of the hypothesis and what is it that I'm looking for, you need to know. That is one kind of critical thinking. Second kind of critical thinking is you would have to come back and say, I typed in the other day, I think this was into the Nano Bananas in Germany, show me a picture with me and James Bond, right? And it gave it to me, it didn't look anything like me, right? So I need to have known the critical thinking in order to look at an image and come back and say, is that image even faintly right? It's another example. So some of these things, in fact, my sincere belief is that what I call as the domain knowledge, the people who have that knowledge are the ones who will benefit more because they'll know how to use the AI tools in order to solve the problems they've been solving. If you're not an energy auctioneer, right, then you never know what to do with the AI in front as an example. Yeah, let me pause there. Another question.
What do you think about the potential of artificial intelligence to promote more sustainability, to use artificial intelligence tools as a pathway to create better environmental solutions?
So the question, if I understand it, is use of AI in sustainability, right, in order to ensure sustainability. So here's where we are today. Right? The amount of use of energy is just exploding. It's just exploding. It's not only the AI data centers where you're training the models. You know, let's take a completely different sector, electric vehicles. Right? The electric vehicles are drawing enormous amounts of energy from the grid. You have the developing countries who are using enormous amount of energy to become developed countries. That growth curve is much more steep for those countries, the BRICS, compared to the United States. So all of this, the amount of energy use is exploding. So now you come back and say, what is it that I can do? What is the problem at hand? The problem at hand is optimization. How can I create and generate and sell electricity in a manner that is going to minimize? I'll give you a couple of small examples. There are some startups in Israel. So when you have the solar panel and that is focused towards the sun in order to convert it into energy, if you can optimize the tilt of the panel even 5 degrees to follow the motion of the sun more closely, the amount of electricity that you can get out of that same solar panel increases by 7%. So now, in order to do that and do the dynamic tracking and moving is being done in agentic form today, in AI and as an agentic form. So that's one example. Another example is if I want to use AI in energy, in order to come back and say, there's the vast amounts of oil fields out there. You know, I want to drill somewhere. Where do I go and drill? Previously, the likes of Schlumberger, etc., it would be a 10-year project because it's a capital intensive. Capital intensive means it's going to take you $100 billion before you can sink one oil rig and get the first gallon of oil out of it. So now they will do enormous amount of simulations, regression testing simulations, build your scientific models. The data sets that these simulations used were quite restricted. So tomorrow you can use AI in order to come back and use much more data sets, extensive data sets. You have satellite data marking every part of the earth. How can I go and get that data and include this in my scientific simulations analysis in order to look at this? So think of AI as another very powerful scientific tool for doing the analysis. And there are problems aplenty in energy and sustainability for which AI can help. Next one. Yes?
Do you believe that AI should be integrated into like schools, and like schools should teach like AI and stuff?
So it should be integrated into
education.
Yes. So there are various pedagogies regarding the use of AI in education, right? I want to speak my 2 cents and not against any of the existing pedagogies. So one is something like an AI assistant, where previously if you were to do a multiple test question, you would have again end notes right or wrong. You would not actually know where you went wrong. You would not know actually what is the concept that you got or did not get, right? Whereas today, I think Gemini has something called the study mode. Of course, Khan has Khanmigo, number of these things. When you go in, they follow your steps in order to come back and say, where did you go wrong? What is the most likely concept that you did not get, rather than giving you an answer? So that's where AI helps you to learn. they help you to learn. So things like that, I think, are vastly helpful. There is also the democratization of education, right? In terms of education becoming very, very, very expensive, and then if you can have open source, there are many countries out there that take the courses that are offered by our elite universities for next to nothing, and AI helps them in order to go and input what they know in their language. Take a country like India, its language is very, very important. Not all of them know English. And it's very hard for a Coursera or someone else to translate all this. Whereas with AI at the front end, it is going to translate it, and then you can still learn at this. So there are very many aspects of AI in education that could be hugely helpful. Yeah, please.
Do you think that AI should be implemented into medicine to perform things like surgeries and things like that? Do you think that AI should be implemented into medicine to perform things like complicated surgeries?
That's a good question. So AI, right? Can AI, or should AI be used in medicine, right? Now, there are two different things in any of these systemic use of AI, whether it's in your traffic system or in the medical system. One is, if you belong to Pam Sutter today, and you're getting your knee x-rayed, is being sent somewhere else, a labor arbitration, and they are reading it and sending it back, right? That's what's happening today. And tomorrow what's happening is in that other country where they're sending it, it's not only labor arbitration, they're also using AI in order to read those x-rays and send it back, right? So there's radiology, dermatology, pathology, number of these things where it's about taking a body of knowledge in medicine and applying it to the individual. Yes, it's being done significantly using AI. There is also this question of robotic surgery. In fact, I learned that a hip surgery is much more straightforward than a knee surgery, and there are robotic surgeons today, with the help of real surgeons, orthopedic surgeons, doing hip surgeries. So this is one aspect of it, a very exciting aspect of AI and robotics being used and agents. There's a second aspect in terms of policy and governance and accountability. So if something were to go wrong, who is responsible? Do you come back and say that it is the robotic agent? Do you come back and say it's the company that manufactured that? Do you come back and say it is the hospital that trained it? Or do you come back and say it is the orthopedic surgeon under whose watch this happened? And that policy has not quite caught up yet. Same question with respect to Waymo, right? And a lot of these vehicles which are out there, if there's an accident out there, whose responsibility is it? Is it the tech? Is it the company? Is it the car? Is it something that the user did? So we are in the nascent stages of the evolution of AI policy and AI governance, and I see much more of that progressing. And in fact, a number of the people who have knowledge, basic knowledge of how these things work, would really do a lot in terms of contributing to these areas in order to look at AI policy, AI governance, AI law, in order to come back. And because what's going to happen is that these policies are going to be enacted with or without the information of somebody with a domain expert. It would be wonderful if you guys would think about that. Yes? Yeah. Time, please.
Do you think AI is taking jobs?
So I'm sure you've heard the answer that every disruptive technology, goes through a period where there is a loss of jobs, and then there's new types of jobs being created, right? So there's the question of what if you take my previous employer Google, right, and then you come back and say, look at the freshman level entry, right, entry jobs which are software engineering. And today, a lot of these SDLC, software development lifecycle, is being done by AI. So you come back and say, what is the necessity of the human there versus the human in the loop where they're doing the oversight? It's very different. So my 2 cents is that, yes, like many other disruptive technologies, we will see a loss in jobs before there's a gain in jobs, which are very different. Now, there is also questions being debated in terms of how much productivity is actually required. We are facing declining population all over the world, not only in developed countries, but also in developing countries. So when you have a declining population and a rising productivity, and you have these two trends intersecting with one another, how much productivity is needed? Do we move into a 4-day work week? Is that good enough? Do we move into universal basic income? What is the future going to look like and how do the jobs play in there is an integral question. And it'll probably play out in your lifetime, but perhaps not Monday morning. Next one.
Do you believe that there should be more cybersecurity applied to AI tools to prevent unethical use of AI?
100%. Yes, absolutely. Now, the cybersecurity has gotten very good in terms of the previous attack surfaces. AI has presented a whole bunch of new attack surfaces. So when you think of these new attack surfaces, vibe coding, I don't know how many of you do vibe coding here. If you look at vibe coding, it is generating code for you. Now, are they all following the security policies? No. So now companies, like security companies, are coming up with ways in order to fill the security holes of a code generated by vibe coding, as an example. So we have the situation of AI trying to tackle this problem of AI-generated anything. Fake code, I mean, I'm sure you've read all this news about, you get this call which says that the voice sounds so much like the CEO, and it says that, I was trying to reach somebody in the finance department, he's not there, can you please issue the check, this and that. And then he gives you all the markers, which makes him sound like he's a CEO. It's a deep fake. How do you go ahead and protect that? So then images. So voice right now is more vulnerable than images, but images is coming next. So should we use AI in terms of these? Absolutely. And should we use cyber much more within the AI cyber community? Yes. One more question with respect to cyber is how does quantum tackle this? Right? When we are looking at encryption and decryption codes today, these codes today, I will come to you, perhaps that might be the last one. I see two of them. So you look at these codes, quantum codes today, right? Today, 53 qubits is all that's being generated by the companies. The day it becomes hundreds of qubits and thousands of qubits, you will have quantum computing at scale here, and every one of these security codes will be broken. You will have a repeat of Y2K all over again, except with quantum this time. Yes?
So as global tensions increase, do you see cyber threats coming more and more from more international or foreign entities, or do they primarily come from more domestic sources?
They're everywhere. They're everywhere. Yeah. So it's a difference in ideology, and as the country becomes more polarized, the differences in ideologies within the country exist as much as outside. They're everywhere. One more?
So you mentioned.
Okay. Yes, I can take a few more.
So you mentioned geopolitical issues and having to think about those. So were you or your company ever involved with maybe negotiations or diplomacy with other countries or other companies?
Negotiations for? I didn't catch the last part.
For maybe with other countries or other companies to ensure there weren't any problems with, let's say, the solar panel example you mentioned.
Negotiation for a cyber breach.
Yeah, or to ensure you have access to one resource.
So we have some United States rules which we follow. When money is involved, we have to involve the government. Very simple. So we have the Federal Bureau of Investigation. By the way, every day I wake up and thank the FBI. They are an amazing resource. There's so much that they can do, that they do know, and they protect the country way beyond you can ever imagine. So that's step one. Now, in terms of any negotiations with respect to any countries, whether it's nation-state actors or individuals, once there's money involved, we get the FBI involved. So if the FBI comes in and then we go through a negotiation, first of all, to understand what is it that they have. Do they have what they say they have? This is question number one. Question number two, when you pay them and they give you the decryption key, is that going to be a valid key? There's a question of honor among thieves being discussed when it comes to cyber. They will give you a decryption key that does not work. And then what? We have to pay the money and not got the decryption key. So how do you deal with that? So we go through a very sort of, methodical thing, closest as you can think of a hostage crisis and how we tackle that. This would be very similar to that. And personally, if I was involved, I would be not at liberty to divulge.
Hi, sorry. As AI systems become more capable of autonomous decision making, how should we balance efficiency and innovation and accountability and human values, and who ultimately bears responsibility when these systems act in ways that society did not intend?
Those are the dual rails, right? Those are the dual rails. How do you balance accountability while not stifling innovation, right? So we have lots of examples where innovation has pushed significantly ahead, right? And then the policy is catching up. And typically that has been, and the question is that when it comes to AI, should it be that way? I'll give you an example of data privacy, right? Data privacy, much more data, volumes and gobs of data was consumed by many of the companies, whether it's Amazon trying to understand your shopping preference, whether it's Google trying to understand what you search for, whether it is Meta trying to understand your social profile, whoever it is. Vast amounts of data were collected before the consumer woke up to realize that it is my data and there needs to be a policy in place in order to govern it. So now you come back and say there are governance being put in order to do this when the horse is out of the barn, yes, for this, but maybe for the next tranche of data. Now we get into the question of what should the policy look like. So let's assume I'm the company and I want to follow the law. Then I go to the FTC, Federal Trade Commission, and say, what do you want me to do? They're like, okay, put a dialogue where you go ahead and tell the consumer that do you accept your data being used, right? You say yes, you check it. Now when you're on the screen, you're busy checking everything. Yes, 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 right? At the end of it, you go and you transact your business or e-commerce or whatever that you want to do. Now, meanwhile, the company has collected all this data and you have no idea what it's going to do with it. So now the responsibility, and this is the subject of the DOJ lawsuits that are going on currently, the responsibility still lies with the company because the company knows much better what it is going to do with the data versus the layperson who has no idea what the data is going to be done with. So even though they have said yes not knowing what the use of the data is going to be. So that is an example where a policy needs to be in place which is going to protect and give the accountability to the proper place. This is a vast area, and every one of these things, accountability, policy, while not stifling innovation, is a very nuanced dance at best. 2 more questions. Yes?
Do you think the current American school system really nurtures a strong like problem solving? Do you think it nurtures strong critical thinking? And
Elaine just going to shoot me if I answer that. Many of the, as you probably read up as you asked this question, many of the international tests that are there, America does not fare very well, especially does not fare well in math and science, and does not fare well in language arts as well. So we have this problem, and consistently the country has been falling behind. Not to say that an individual region or a school, but the country as a whole, if there is such a thing that you can talk about, has been falling behind. And it's a serious question. Is one of the things that we should do as a developed country is to focus on our youngsters and make sure that the schools, and that was the reason that I had taken up the K-12 education, working with Senator Simerton. The question used at that time was the following. Senator Simerton had this question where he said, you have the children and they drop out, we don't know when they drop out, and they end up in the juvenile justice system, and California state ends up spending a lot of money. Why are they dropping out? Why are they not staying in the school system? Right? And so we had to do this analysis in order to come back and say, at what time did they drop out? Is it 5th grade, 6th grade, 7th grade? What kind of interventions could the school have done in order to make sure that they retain these kids and then inspire them so that they go and finish the K-12? Very, very difficult to answer. I had visitors from the Teachers Union, I had visitors from or they call us the bosses, who come and tell me that Ms. Akella, no matter what your report is going to be, you're going to disregard it.